Hi everyone, welcome back. Thanks for joining us today. We've got a brand new story to share with you. So let's begin. My name's Graham. See, I believe every man has a limit where enough is enough. It piles up until one day, and you realize you're done. For me, that moment came when my girlfriend, Cecilia, decided to take a girls' trip without telling me. It was the final straw. She never thought I'd walk away. She assumed I'd just sit through it, the way I had been doing for months. Now I know that might sound drastic, and maybe it would be if that were the first issue we had. But it wasn't. Far from it. So, to make you understand how I got to this point, why I chose to leave without warning, I need to take you back to how it all started. Because this didn't happen overnight. So, here's the whole story. Cecilia and I were together for a little over 5 years. From early on, I was upfront with her about one key thing. I wasn't interested in getting married legally. My reason wasn't out of fear of commitment, like people often assume. It was deeper than that. I've seen too many situations go south, and it always gets worse when the legal system gets involved. Divorce courts, lawyers, paperwork, dragged out battles. It becomes a mess. I didn't want that kind of third-party interference in my personal life. If a relationship ended, I wanted it to end with dignity, not court summonses and property disputes. At first, Cecilia pushed back a little. She asked questions and tried to understand why. She made a few arguments here and there about commitment, about security, about the future. But when she saw that I wasn't budging on it, she didn't make it a war. Eventually, she said something I held on to for a long time. She told me she loved me, and she didn't want to lose me over something like legal paperwork. She said that what mattered most to her was that we loved each other, and that we were building something real. In her words, a piece of paper wasn't going to define our relationship. And I respected her for not walking away from me because of my beliefs. I loved her for that. And speaking of Cecilia, she was what most people would call the full package. Beautiful, no doubt, but also intelligent. Socially, she was always active. She had friends from every walk of life, and people gravitated toward her. She is always planning something, always going somewhere, and she has her own things going on. To me, we were a strong pair. Two people with different views on some things, but united in how we felt about each other. Or, at least, that's what I believed in the beginning. At around the 3-year mark in our relationship, Cecilia was going through a bit of a rough patch in her career. She was in between jobs, trying to make a switch from her old role into something new, and the uncertainty was clearly stressing her out. She wasn't the type to openly ask for help, but I could see it. She needed some kind of stability, a bit of breathing room to land on her feet. We'd been dating for a while by then, and I felt responsible in a way, so I suggested we move in together. At the time, my apartment wasn't much better space-wise, especially not for two people. So we went out, searched for a place together, and ended up leasing a bigger apartment. We signed a joint lease, put both our names on it. Living together also meant we had to be more intentional about our finances. We started combining some expenses. Nothing was strictly formal, but it became a habit. I naturally fell into the role of the planner. Cecilia, on the other hand, was more on the spontaneous side. She liked to go with the flow, and while that could be fun sometimes, it also meant I was usually the one making sure we weren't overspending or missing important payments. I didn't mind it too much. I figured we were just balancing each other out. On the surface, everything looked good. We felt like a proper couple building a life side by side. But it wasn't long before I started to notice things. And, at that point, I wasn't ready to admit something might be off. I just thought we were adjusting, growing. Turns out, I was giving the benefit of the doubt more often than I should have. When we weren't living together, it was easier to let stuff slide. If she went out with her friends or took weekend trips, I could shrug it off. But once we were under the same roof, everything felt a little more exposed. Now, I'm not the controlling type. I wasn't out here telling her to stay home or change who she was overnight. But I did expect that once we decided to live together, there would be some shift in priorities, some kind of adjustment that reflects that we were building a life together. But with Cecilia, it started to feel like she never really moved past that baddie phase. You know, the one where every weekend is booked with parties, girls' nights, or random out-of-town getaways. And look, I get it. People have their ways of unwinding. And I'm not anti-fun. But this wasn't just a once-in-a-while thing. It was starting to become a pattern. Almost every weekend. At first, I felt it wasn't worth bringing up. But over time, it started eating at me. There's a difference between being in a relationship and living like you're single with someone else in the house due to the person's prolonged absence. So, One morning, I finally decided to say something. I called her and I told her, look, I know we're not married, but this is still a committed relationship. And I'm not comfortable with how often you're out partying or doing all these girls' weekends. It doesn't feel right. I figured if this relationship was going to work, communication had to be part of it. To her credit, she didn't blow up or get defensive in that moment. She listened quietly, and after a pause, she said she hadn't realized it bothered me that much. In her eyes, it wasn't that serious. But, she added, if it was affecting me, she'd try to put some control on it. She said she loved me, and she didn't want me feeling like I came second to a good time. And I believed her. I remember thinking, all right, maybe we just hit our first real bump, but we handled it like adults. For a while after that, I felt reassured, and that gave me hope that we were on the same page after all. Those next few months felt peaceful. We had our typical little misunderstandings, but nothing major. Just the usual couple stuff. It wasn't perfect, but it felt like we had found a rhythm. I remember thinking, okay, maybe this could really last. But that's the funny thing about peace. It's often the calm before the storm. A little over 2 years into this new phase, things started to go bad again. The turning point for me was our joint account. Now, ever since we moved in together, we have decided to share finances to some degree. We each kept a personal account, but we also had one joint account for rent, groceries, bills, basic shared stuff. We agreed to be transparent with it. But one day, I was reviewing the bank statement, just doing my usual end-of-month check, and I noticed something weird. There were charges that didn't line up with what Cecilia had told me. She'd said she was going out of town to visit family for the weekend, but some of the transactions were made in a completely different area, nowhere near her family's place, and it made no sense given where she said she was. Still, I didn't bring it up, but letting it go didn't make the feeling go away. In fact, the longer I sat with it, the more it gnawed at me. I didn't want to believe we were slipping again, but the suspicion just kept growing. One Saturday, I had the weekend off, so I was home. Cecilia had invited a couple of her friends over. That wasn't unusual. They were all sitting in the living room while I was in the bedroom with the door slightly open. I just happened to hear the conversation while I was inside. They were laughing, chatting about dating apps and relationships, and then I heard Cecilia say, "Honestly, I'm basically single." The second I heard those words, I froze. There was laughter like it were a joke. Maybe to them it was. But to me, it wasn't funny. I didn't say anything right away. I let the day go on. Her friends stayed for another hour or so. And when they finally left, and she came into the room and asked her calmly, "Hey, what did you mean earlier when you said you're basically single?" She rolled her eyes and said, "God, you're so sensitive lately." That response told me everything I needed to know. That was how she saw our relationship. That night, I didn't argue. From that point on, it was like we couldn't have a simple conversation without it turning into a full-blown argument. It didn't matter how carefully I chose my words or how calm I was. If I brought up something that bothered me, she'd either get defensive like I was attacking her, or sarcastic like I was being dramatic. Sometimes she'd even flip the whole thing around and make it seem like I was the problem for making a big deal out of nothing. There was no real resolution, just tension that never really went away. The worst part? The more we fought, the more she did the exact things we had already talked about. It almost felt intentional, like she wanted to prove a point or punish me for speaking up. If we fought about her disappearing for hours without saying where she was going, then the next week she'd leave the house again and not tell me anything at all. If I said I wasn't cool with her partying every weekend, she'd go out and stay out even later. It was like she took every disagreement as a challenge. How far could she push before I finally broke? And I'll admit this, after a while, I just stopped bringing stuff up. I got tired. Arguing wasn't getting me anywhere. Trying to have adult conversations didn't help. So I started holding it all in, thinking maybe if I didn't push so hard, she'd see the effort and meet me halfway. But that was a mistake. Saying nothing didn't keep the peace. It just gave her more room to do whatever she wanted without consequence. Sometimes she'd leave for the whole night, and I'd just be sitting there wondering if she was okay, or worse, wondering who she was with. And when I did ask, I get vague excuses like, "Oh, I stayed at a friend's," or "It was too late to drive back." But there was never a heads up beforehand, never any consideration. I want to be clear here, this wasn't about control. I didn't need to monitor her every move. I just wanted respect, communication, and basic relationship courtesy. But the more I stayed silent, the more invisible I became in my own home. So I came home from work one Tuesday evening, but the apartment was quiet. At first, I didn't think too much of it. Cecilia usually beats me home by a good hour or so, but sometimes traffic happens. I changed out of my work clothes, got a drink, and waited. 30 minutes passed. Still no sign of her. I checked the time again. An hour gone. Still nothing. I sent her a message. Where are you? 30 minutes later, she finally responded. She said she took a leave from work to have a girls' trip, that it skipped her mind to tell me because I was busy. The logic didn't hold. Nothing about that message made sense. Not the timing, not the tone, not the excuse. It didn't add up, and more than anything, it didn't feel respectful. How do you forget to mention a trip to your live-in partner? Someone you share space and life with? That was it for me. It became crystal clear. This is who she is. And I finally accepted that I didn't want to do this anymore. I didn't want to spend another month, another week, hell, not even another day, trying to convince someone to treat me like I mattered. I took a breath and typed back one last reply. I won't be here when you get back. I wish you the life you're chasing, but I'm not waiting around to be a backup plan. She responded, confused. What do you mean? But I didn't reply. I had already said everything I needed to say. For once, I didn't let her draw me into another round of emotional back and forth. That night, I packed up everything I owned. Anything that had my name or my energy attached to it, I took it. I didn't leave a single item behind for her to use as an excuse to contact me again. By the next morning, I had moved out. I went straight to the leasing office and applied to remove my name from the lease. I cut off her contact, blocked her on everything. She tried reaching out. A new number popped up on my phone later that week. You're really just leaving? Then we can talk. But I didn't respond because I meant what I said. I was done. So, a few days go by. I knew the date she was supposed to be back from her little girl's trip. She called me that evening with another new number, probably right after unlocking the door and realizing what had happened. I didn't know it was her, so I picked, but when I heard her voice, I ended it. She called back, but I let it ring. Then she called again. And again. I didn't answer. She moved from calls to texts. Same number. The first message said, "You're really just leaving?" Then another one followed. "We can talk about it." I looked at the screen for a while. I just felt done because everything I had to say, I had already said. I blocked the new number and went on with my evening. And that's where I'm at now. I know some of you watching might be thinking, why didn't you at least give her a final conversation? A proper ending. But here's what I'll say. Sometimes people mistake your silence for cruelty when it's actually mercy. When someone shows you over and over that your peace doesn't matter to them, eventually, you choose it for yourself. Quietly. So what do you all think? Was I wrong to leave like that? If you were in my shoes, what would you have done? Let me know in the comments.